Hello, my name is Vyacheslav Rezikov, and we start yet another event under the auspices of Culture 2.0, open discussion project by St. Petersburg International Cultural Forum. That's the key part of its educational program, and in the focus of our attention, in the focus of our current panel, well, it's art, culture, and modern technologies, something that makes art come closer to people. And they are discussing under the auspices of Culture 2.0 the issues of more democratic art, more democratic culture, and how culture and societies meet, and where do they meet. And today we have a very interesting discussion because we're going to talk about both simple and complex, high and low. We're going to talk about cafes and restaurants in museums. And I'll start off by introducing you the participants of our today's discussion. And we have Bjorn Stenvers, board member of the ICOM, International Committee for Marketing and Public Relations from the Netherlands. We have Helena Koberg, senior curator at the National Museum in Stockholm. Anna Trapkova, general director of the Museum of Moscow, Russia. Mitya Borisov, restaurant owner and producer from Russia. Kathleen Lebesko, associate vice president for strategic initiatives and professor of communications and media arts, Marymount, Manhattan College in New York. And Vasily Tseretelli. He's executive director of the Moscow Museum of Contemporary Art, apart from lots of other titles that he owns in the Russian cultural sphere. I've just listed you the participants, and I think we should start off by, to kick the ball rolling for all of those who joined us, explaining the actual core of the problem at hand. Everybody knows that museums survived, well, pretty easily without cafes. But now, why does this problem become so relevant today? Why are we talking about that as a problem? Why is that the need arose? And is there a need for cafeterias and restaurants in the museums, or is it a height of fashion? Is it something that the fashion brings in? Do we really need cafes and restaurants for museums? Is everything so bad that, like they say in Russia, no other way but to lure people in but a carrot? Not the stick, though. And I hope that everybody here in the discussion will explain their opinion. And Mr. Stevens, you've got the first floor. Can you please begin? Yes, you can start, yes.
Hello, dear Russian friends. I miss you very much from Amsterdam. That's the first I have to say. Because already for I don't know how long I can't enter Russia like everybody else. And also, but going towards the topic of today, if I look at 6 plates on a restaurant table, then these 6 plates I can give a name. One of the plates is called income. One of them is called attracting visitors and non-visitors. One of them is called content. One of them is called education. One of them is called image. And one of them is called horeca. To start with the last, some museums and some heritage, they are simply horeca. They are a cafe, they are a restaurant. If you look at some bakeries in Kaliningrad or in Kaluga, they are the heritage of the region. So sometimes it is very simple. If I look at income, everybody loves money, even during these times. And also when I recently saw from the 1st of January, all the foreigners can come in with the electronic visa. So you better make sure that you want to earn money. But income is a very important plate on the table. It is about expanding the minutes of a visit of a visitor in the beginning or in the middle or at the end as part of the facilities. And also a sponsor and a stakeholder could be involved in this. So on the whole, you can make money with a restaurant. Many restaurants actually, Anna will talk about it later, but many restaurants can prove even in Russia also that you can make money with it. The third plate is to attract people. Let's hope it's only people. You can attract visitors and non-visitors. Non-visitors, I mean people who maybe not go to the museum, but just go to the museum cafe or restaurant, or sometimes just a hotel. Some museums, like Rostov Kremlin Museum, has a hotel. It's okay if they don't want to visit the museum. It's not a problem with the people. It's a problem between, or a challenge between the hotel and the museum. Again, it's part of the facilities then. So we have a plate called Horeca, already a plate called Income, a plate called Attracting. Another plate is the content. Just to support also our curators, a restaurant is a perfect place for an exhibition. It's a convenient place for an exhibition. And especially because American research and also Amsterdam research showed that we only have 20 seconds average that we spend on a unique selling point of a museum sometimes. In a restaurant, people sit down and they need to sit longer than 17 seconds. So this is fantastic. Also, we can see sometimes objects in use. Sometimes you have objects which are used in restaurants or cafes or horeca, and you can make combinations of this. Like in festivals, sometimes you show in heritage festivals, also in Russia, you show objects in use. Another interesting thing among content about this fourth plate is that you can make combinations with the chef cook and a curator. If I ask a curator, how do you treat your paintings? They say, Очень круто, I mark it with a 5. Yeah, maybe 4. And if I ask a chef cook, how do you treat your plates? Do you design the plates? Do you make nice dinner? Of course, the same mark. But if I ask the curator, how do you treat the restaurant? It's maybe a 1. It's not good. So if you let them collaborate, there are 2 artists at work. The last 2 plates, we have an educational plate. An educational plate means that the restaurant can explain more of the museum. Sometimes they can explain more about the story or in the expanding extra minutes. But sometimes also it goes even beyond the museum walls. Sometimes you want to make a publication about it. I can give you a very recent example. Talking about your carrots, you just mentioned the carrot. Well, carrots are very good for your eyes. It's vitamin A. And in the garden of Rostov Kremlin Museum near Yaroslav, Rostov Veliki, they grow carrots. And now, together with some eye doctors in the Netherlands, we are writing a book with recipes how you can make nice food with original carrots from a museum garden. So you can bring it even beyond the museum walls. Also, you can bring products outside the museum walls, external sales. On the airport, really samlyot. And another thing on the education is that you also can have an experience of the museum story much more. So sometimes you can have all kinds of experiences in the restaurant, which you couldn't have in the very passive way how an exhibition sometimes is. There is also a third thing among education is that the staff, your own museum staff, can learn from the people from Horeca. Because the people at Horeca, they are used to serve people and they are entrepreneurs. They are trained to make money. And this is something sometimes you want to let your museum staff being learned. So in the combination of these 2 blood types, these people can learn from each other. And then the last plate of the 6 on the table, it's the image. First of all, I'm not going to end with this. First of all, it's the prestige. Sometimes it's the prestige of the museum, but many times, and also in Russia, it's just the prestige hierarchically of a director who just wants to have it because the other director also has it, or the other museum also has it, and he doesn't want to, he wants to have the same. If I'm ending with the sixth plate on a very nice way, I would say it is to professionalize the museum on the whole, because if you look at the, let's say, world-class museums, they all have all these facilities in order, they have their image in order, they educate their people, they have a good and healthy income, so it just belongs to a professional, healthy, good museum. These are the six plates I just wanted to mention, because these are also the six plates in a more different way, in a business model, of course, what I teach at Rangiks normally. Not to bore you too much with theory on marketing and business, I just wanted to mention it via plates. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. That's one fabulous explanation. One thing I would, build a bridge to the next participant, really. In terms of marketing, all of this is fairly self-explanatory, and the logic of the people who work in the museum, it's also understandable. But don't you think the visitors need a sort of a shift in their paradigm in terms of the museum? Because as far as I understand, I live in St. Petersburg, a fairly classically in terms of mentality. People go to the museum for knowledge, not for fun or for pleasure. So there can be a lack of understanding here. Here in St. Petersburg, we got two buildings next to each other, literally next to each other, not even a hall. There's a planetarium and the music hall, or a cabaret, and you can accidentally walk into a wrong door, and oops, what's going to happen? Because, you go to planetarium looking for one emotion and to a cabaret hall for totally different. Do you think, it don't exist anymore? It's the attitude to the museum like a planetarium. Do they go in for knowledge rather than for fun? Can you clarify your stand?
You're asking me? Then I have to disappoint you a little.
Well,
that in big cities, especially the big marketed museums, people come just to bucket list it off. That's it. They just want to see it because everybody talks about it, and they want to come back with saying, I did it. Unfortunately, this is the result of last year. Next to this, we have many people in the museum who want to see objects who are famous. So they want to see certain objects who also were marketed by also the people or the museum. And then you have a whole group of people who are super interested to learn. And if you just open the door a little bit, they're already there. All people I just mentioned want to have sometimes a cup of tea or coffee to sit and relax. And another thing I need to mention is a lot of museums. Oh, sorry.
Who would argue that?
They have to preserve their objects very well. They need climate control. And for us as people, after 20 minutes, the climate control comes to our mind. It gives us less oxygen. This is why a lot of parents have trouble after half an hour with their kids. So if you have like a route or a march route through the musée, then you need to very strategically sometimes need to place these break places. So I hope this is a little bit of an answer.
To a degree. Now I want to ask Helena to muse on that from the point of view of somebody who does curating in the museum. Does when we talk about museum, do we, like, who are we talking about? You know, the previous speaker listed. You know, is it those who just, you know, are there for just some sort of a cultural pilgrimage during their touristic visit, or is it just people who come in for the information? How does it help, or does it get in the way? This conglomeration of these institutions.
I'm a senior curator, so of course I would prefer people to come into the museum to learn from the art and look at the art and appreciate the art. But I know that a lot of people don't. They, just as Björn said, they have different reasons for it. But I think that it's a possible. I mean, the restaurant, the coffee shop is a service. It can be quite tiring, as Björn said, to walk around the museum. You can take a break, you can do something else for a while, and perhaps take another route around the museum. But I also think I actually prepared a presentation with images. I thought I was going to show that, but I think you can curate the exhibition, or actually, as we did in the National Museum, create an entire interior with furnishings that and it's an artistic collaboration to sort of get the interior for the restaurant, but at the same time educate people about the design process. And perhaps you go there just to eat and don't care about the exhibition, but start an interest in art, and perhaps next time you come, you walk around the museum and see the exhibitions, and you see the correlation between the objects and what you experience in the restaurant.
Понятно. Хотел бы
Got it. Now, one detail. I don't think any sane person would argue that when visiting a museum, a human being needs a place to have a cup of coffee and eat a sandwich. At the same time, you know, we start talking about integration. You know, museums with, you know, food and beverage institutions and restaurants of haute cuisine, of chef's cuisine. You know, something when it's a separate statement in its own right. A restaurant that would feel great even without a museum connection. How interesting can this association can be, and how good can it be? And we will ask Anna Trepkova to answer this question, because I believe before she became the director of the Museum of Moscow, she worked at a different museum, the Garage. Well, I mean, I think it's fairly unprecedented when a museum would be built in the former restaurant building, because it first was a restaurant and then it became a museum, and the kitchen was the first thing that was open in the museum. How do these institutions coexist? Thank you, Vyacheslav. I'd like to start by answering your previous question. Is there a contradiction between a restaurant as a gravity point in a museum? Can we today ask a question, is, you know, make a distinction between knowledge and entertainment? The way you asked it in your question, because yeah, indeed, I worked in Garage and in the Pushkin Museum, and I also am part of the academic programs of Garage still. I still teach museum activity to the students of the HSE. I'd start with a 20-year-old quote from Nicholas Sirote, the legendary director of Tate Gallery, who, opening Tate Modern, and at the Bankside, he said the following: in the year 2000, November of the year 2000, people can be attracted by the new buildings. They can enjoy the social experience of visiting a museum. They can enjoy experience of the view, espresso, or a glass of wine, or buying a book or a T-shirt created by an artist. Many are ready to praise a museum, but are still suspicious to its content. What does this quote illustrate? It tells us that many a time the knowledge and the enlightenment experience that is given by the museum, the enlightenment of living through the art, due to various education levels of the visitors, various background of the visitors, it becomes inaccessible. And the genius of the Tate Modern that targets, that many museums target, including the Garage Museum in their project, in the Gorky Park, they are looking at creating the wholesome experience with the visitor with many points of interaction that would be accessible to the visitor. So what Sirota was talking about, that the entrance point to a complicated museum like a contemporary art museum can be a cup of coffee or a glass of wine or a merch with some recognizable artist or character or pop culture or whatever. So today, when we're looking at museums and we're looking at the knowledge that they bring as a wholesome cultural institutions, a holistic experience, and we have to compete with mass media, with other entertainment venues, and use to the full use the capacities to broaden our audience. But when it comes to Garage at the Gorky Park, I think it's hard to compare to the overall situation in the Russian Museum because the private institution of culture, Rem Koolhaas, when worked at the restoration project of the Four Seasons Cafe, he functionally changed everything entirely. There's no kitchen. The kitchen was built through a new zoning of the space, and that Anton Belov, the Garage team, the kitchen and the cafe became an important gravity point. But I wanted to talk about that if a private institution of culture can create restaurants in Russia and can include it into the experience, I, as director of the city institution of culture, I understand how many obstacles, legal obstacles, do I meet on the way of building a unique restaurant in a unique place that is the Museum of Moscow in the space of the Provian storage, which is the 19th century monument. And it'd be great to hear the experience of my colleagues and look at their presentations of the inspiring presentations of how you do it. But that's a sore subject for us that maybe we'll support. See, it's great to serve a cup of coffee inside the museum. But having overcome lots of obstacles, we can feed a person. But the service of the cafe in the largest museums in the city, their operators usually are the organizations that are more like mass market catering and not a unique project. This is how it is in Moscow. What we can't do, we cannot pour a glass of wine to our visitor. And going back to the Tate Modern experience and this glass of wine with a view up from the top with the beautiful view of the city, and you remember 171st federal law on the on the distribution of alcohol, accompanied by the letter of the Ministry of Finance from the April 19th, 2017, that dictates that the institutes of culture are prohibited from selling alcohol. And it's a tiny particular that maybe isn't even worth it. But one time, when I tried to ban people from the theater have a glass of champagne before the performance, I was given such a massacre just so the theatrical people had their chance to drink their wine at the cafe, because they said they were tearing up their shirts and saying that, you know, it's not the prejudice. It's not the prejudice that doesn't let us get the experience. At the Russian legislature, our favorite Russian legislature, it was my pain, and I give the word to Vasily Zurabovich, a more experienced director that knows how to overcome the legislature. Well, the invisible tears as our legislature, invisible tears. So we'll go on in a sec, because as you were telling this story, a question popped up, which I don't think. We were talking about catering. Well, there's catering and there's restaurant. And we're talking about when you're feeding somebody, is, you know, giving a sandwich, a cup of coffee is one thing. There's no question there. Yeah, you have to. But the question is, do we need to unite museums with haute cuisine restaurants? Why does one want to do that? A person goes into a museum to enjoy art. A person goes to a restaurant to enjoy food. And aren't we mixing the two? Aren't we substituting one with the other? How can they help each other? Maybe we hear from Mitya Borisov, a restaurant operator. Maybe he'll tell us something. Oh, I will. Oh, I will. Hi, everybody. I'll start with a comment from the first speaker, from Bjorn. First of all, everything I wanted to say, Bjorn said in the first 10 minutes of our discussion. I sign under every single word, the 6 plates. Second thing, the short note of mine about education and knowledge without pleasure. I believe the idea is disgusting. And because of this idea, I changed 7 schools during the Soviet era. Then I built a career of a history teacher as we were transiting away from the Soviet government. And third, if we talk about cafes and the rest, I have special jackets where I hide a flask with alcohol, particularly the museums where, you know, with the serious control at the pat down. And I entirely agree, the education in the cafe, all the plates, you know, I could not have said it better. Because our first restaurant we opened in 1998, 20-something years ago. The very first cafe, we had a gallery of contemporary art, and even though it looked like a squat, it was a run-down apartment that we built with our own hands after the Russian currency lost most of its power in 1998. We put museum quality things from, you know, for our collection, our parents' things, our parents' friends' things, and a lot of people I'm still friends with. They learned the name Anatoly Yakovlev thanks to that. And ever since then, I believe that's how it works. Further on. Haute cuisine, Answering your question, I don't know. I think it's an irrelevant subject. No. I personally, we never did haute cuisine, we did adequate cuisine. So the first task of any catering, whether it's a cafe or a spot, it's adequacy to the location. We had, or we have, fun clubs with nightly dances, and the same places host exhibitions. And they're popular. And no contradictions in there. See, I would do as Bjorn said, the perfectly correct thing, and Anya said exactly right, the legislature. And at the end of I'll tell you how I see this problem. And see, we have positive experience with Vasily Tsereteli. He'll tell you later about it. But we opened a big cafe, big club, not in the museum, but in the museum's building, where there's music and theater and kids education and the whole 9 yards. And it all works. But in Russia, it's not just legislature which makes your life difficult, but it's also the whole understanding, the conservative attitude towards it. A museum is a temple. Let me give you a small example. There's lots of museums, cafes that I came up with. There's a story of the place that everybody knows, Pushkin Museum, a tiny case. Do I have a couple minutes, right? Oh, yeah, you do. As many as you want. See, when I was little, I attended the Art Lovers Club and the Young Art Historians Club at the Pushkin Museum, and in the libraries. And I would pick which library to go to. I picked the library whichever sold the best pies, and where the coffee was at least, potable. So I think I'd go further. Not just a cafe that should be, imagined for each particular museum. I would separately, the cafe, store, like today, the bookstores and museums are generally pretty good around the world now. Marketing, souvenirs, cafe. I'd take it further, because toilets, any other public place has to match the place, the venue. And they have to be a part of the overall museum message. Excuse me, you mean you have to have thematic toilets? Of course. Oh, thank you. By all means, if this museum, want to be attractive for our children, and so, they talk about, well, I'd love to see that. You know what? I would love to see that. I'm walking around the Hermitage, and then, there'll be a separate cultural program, the toilets of the Hermitage. Here, I can do a presentation. No kidding. I can make a presentation right now. Pushkin Museum, where I spent years of my life. Terrible cafe in Soviet Union. Disgusting. Very bad in the 90s too. Then they put the vents in there, so they took the smells away. It's a long hall, 3 meters wide, where all the tables have to fit in, and a bar with food at the end, with food and drinks. This cafe, you can't. It either had to be moved or had to be reimagined in such a way that the line becomes a part of the concept. You cannot technically have any service there that would take the line away. That's what we got. This cafe exists. I've been there, hundreds or thousands of times. Second thing, lines in Pushkin Museum. I can tell you a story about of, you can tell the entire history of Moscow of the 20th century. Legendary exhibitions in the 70s when something would break through the borders and get shown. The exhibition 1996, Moscow, Berlin, the hit around the world hit exhibition, Picasso exhibition, 1989, great many archives, photos, videos, of pictures of lines into Pushkin Museum, endlessly. We offered to take this narrow spot and create an installation, the history of lines or of queues into the Pushkin Museum. You are lining up into the queue, and slowly by two sides from you, there is this media river of lines into Pushkin Museum through the centuries. And you're not bored waiting in the line. The irritation is going away that you're lining up for your bagel for a long time. Second thing, we've attracted to create this video some fairly famous video artists. We were ready to involve in the collection of these materials a lot of people. It's a great marketing, and it would be an installation that the visitors would take part in, and people, and plus it's a historical research. Fourth component was fifth, whatever it is, I don't know. You can look for your parents in these lines, and having found them yourself or your parents through some simple mean, you can get what you lining up for free, or get a present, an edible present from the Pushkin Museum. 6, 7, such cafe. It's a tiniest of spot. Would have made a lot of PR, press, pictures. The entire global artistic press would have written about that. And apart from being a video installation, it becomes, and you become a part of an installation, and I'm not the one to tell you about that, but it's constant performance, constantly involving the public. It's active, interactive, pragmatic. Of course, yeah, you must have decent food and good beverages. And if you break this case by pieces, where's the exhibition, where's the cafe, where's the catering, where's the marketing? These are all your plates, one over the other, stacked up, so I stacked them up. And these projects, I'm confident, should be invented by people who care about museums in general, and this particular museum, and then the tenders, the auctions of how this or that cafe appears, they shouldn't be done by the authorities, but a commission that resembles what I'm seeing on my screen right now. Independent experts, because the technological tasks or the sanitary control, they are tertiary. It's all everything has a resolution. And yes, indeed, this is not about cafes. It's the same with souvenir stores, with bookstores. They got it. The quality of the calligraphy, of designer books, of the museum books, the catalogs, for the exhibition catalogs. No questions anymore. Everybody knows that this should be beyond belief fabulous. So, cafes, sure, and presence of alcohol in the museum. It's a prerequisite. It's a must. How? I mean, for a person of age, if they see the birth of the Venus for the first time and then not go and have a shot of cognac afterwards, how's that possible?
Спасибо. Знаете, моя функция в сегодняшней дискуссии — это как-то, знаете, прибавлять к ней какой-то полемизм.
My function in this discussion is to start debate and to fuel arguments. And while you were speaking here, I thought to myself that everything that you're talking about can be brought to a logical conclusion. Well, you say that we need to unite museums with various entertainment institutions, cafeteria, souvenir stores, and just stores. It's good when a museum has a cinema hall or several, but let's multiply it or let's divide it into something. And so you've got stores, restaurants, cinemas, but how then a museum is different from a mall? Because people go to mall to get entertained. Or imagine a different dynamics. You might have a mall with a museum. And then how do you differentiate, and where's the difference between a museum and a mall? And aren't you diminishing? And I might be the only person who needs to be an ultra-conservative person, but isn't it diminishing the sense of art, the meaning of art? Because when you come to see art, you go into a temple, and you should stay alone with, well, you shouldn't be like finishing your hamburger and having a bottle in the other hand and looking at Botticelli. It might not be very correct. Can you elaborate on that? Can I answer? Of course you can, of course you can. First things first, lots of malls either annex or they start thinking about annexing the exhibitions of modern art. And I think it's a great achievement of museums and the museum community that malls started annexing works of art, because through malls people will go to museums finally. And second, in museums pictures are not being sold, but in malls, why not? And I don't see it's a big issue there. I don't see it's a big problem. May I explain my thought here? Can I do that, please? What I'm saying here is, what we're getting is not a globalization, but homogenization. It makes no difference. If you get same stuff everywhere, you take a food, you take, I don't know, you grab a bite, you bought souvenir, you drank a sip of wine, you saw the beautiful picture, and spend time nicely. I have a unique position here. That's why I'd like to I think that there's no contradiction. I don't think you'll be able to appreciate paintings worse. I don't think you'll be appreciating paintings worse if you're sated and a little bit under the fly. I don't see there is a big problem. There are some technical things that you should be avoiding. You don't have to eat inside the exhibition halls because it's dangerous. So everything that's safe, everything that's safe for the paintings, for the collections, it's okay, it's natural. But imagine you're showing something to people like Egyptian dishes or Egyptian utensils or Byzantium utensils. You put them behind the glass, right? And next to it, you might have an ugly, disgusting cafeteria with the same kind of utensils but of the modern times. Chairs and tables. It doesn't even stand a chance. It will never leave a trace in the history. It will never become a museum item. So I don't see a problem in here. I don't see a contradiction. I don't think there's a big contradiction in here. I think it's not offensive to invite a person for a date into a museum, right? It's not offensive. It's okay. But it's a different question whatsoever. It's more how coherent should restaurants or HoReCa places be with a museum. It's more about museums helping restaurants to shine. I don't think any grandeur helps appreciating art more. That's an awful interesting discussion, Mitya, because you could also ask you the following question. Philharmonic halls, should you appreciate classical music the same way? That's the gist of it. I think we're boiling down to it at the moment. Maybe Kathleen can help us here, can serve a mediator. Let's listen for the view from abroad, so to speak. People who see modern classical art, how do you treat this issue? I know that in New York, in Tate Well, in museums, you often have Michelin-starred restaurants, especially Tate Modern has Michelin-star restaurant. So that point of view, can you elaborate and can you tell us, do these things coexist? Please help me out in here, that a hot art can coexist with, well, HoReCa, with hotels, restaurants, and catering, and they're not negating each other, so to speak, and both institutions add up to each other or emphasize the best. And appetite, human appetite to food, also brings appetite to paintings and culture.
Yes, yes, thank you. Greetings from New York. I want to first thank the organizers for giving me a reason to put on a real shirt. And I'm honored to be on this panel with these esteemed presenters from the various industries. I want to answer your question from a food studies scholarship perspective, but I also want to answer your question from the perspective of a hungry citizen and not necessarily the gatekeeper of this temple, you know, this imaginary temple you keep talking about. And I want to think about what people are looking for in a museum restaurant. My perspective is North American. So in most museums in North America, not the superstars, but the little local or regional museums that are quieter, the model is pure service economy. People are not going to seek out the museum restaurant unless they happen to be visiting the museum, and they want sustenance. They want food that's convenient, that's good quality, that's affordable, and they want a clean and pleasant environment to rest their feet, because contrary to popular opinion, museum going is exhausting. So in the US, these needs are typically met through the cafeteria, which I think, like Mitya was describing, is nothing special. It's a very simple space, pretty functional, and people's expectations are not terribly high of that kind of eating experience. But I've noticed this shift that as we've entered this kind of experience economy in the last 20 years or so, businesses and cultural institutions alike have become focused on curating experiences for their customers, and the memory itself of the experience becomes the product that's being sold. So this kind of model, I think, dovetails nicely with what's been happening at the superstar museum level, you know, the kind of well-funded museums with a high international profile, where they can bring blockbuster exhibits, and where people are going to come to an eating experience with much higher expectations. So I want to talk a little bit about the two types of customers that Bjorn mentioned a little bit already. So the first person is the person who's just there for dinner. They're not going to pay the admission fee. They're not going to set foot in an exhibit. And that person is relying on the restaurant's curatorial creativity, because she expects curatorial creativity at the highest levels with, you know, because of the associated museum. And she sees the meal and the dining experience as artistic. And she expects the restaurant to be doing the symbolic work that she used to have to rely purely on the museum exhibits to do. So I see in these haute spaces that museum restaurants allow eaters to have their culture and eat it too. They do things that several of the other speakers have already mentioned. They bring the art into the decor of the restaurant through, like, perhaps murals or sculptural elements. They're sometimes aligning or thematizing the menus with the exhibits or collections. They're emphasizing authenticity. You know, as we look for real pieces in the museum, we want to know that the food is real and, you know, creatively sourced, even when it's deconstructed on our plates. We are also seeing in these haute spaces an educational effort, much as is happening in the galleries and museums themselves, that the design of the menu, the way the servers interpret for the customers, for the eaters, what they're eating, is very similar to the experience you get from a museum docent in North America. I can go and stand by a painting and ask, you know, the person to tell me a little bit about it. The waiter is doing the same thing in these restaurants. So the other type of customer I want to talk about, who's not the person who just happens to go for dinner, is the culturally savvy museum goer who combines a trip to the museum collections or exhibits with a meal. So if I'm here in New York and I'm headed to MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, to sit across from Marina Abramovich in her white dress for one of the 750 hours that she's going to sit in her chair, I can book the kitchen table at the Modern, which is billed as kind of an exclusive perch where I can take in the, all the activity of the kitchen while the dining experience, which is a multi-course tasting menu that's pretty inventively designed, is unfolding right before my eyes. Or if I'm in Los Angeles, I can visit the Rain Room at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, LACMA, where there's an immersive environment where rain is perpetually falling everywhere except where my body is. And that exhibit's got me thinking about the otherwise impossible task of controlling the rain. And I'm thinking about the drought-stricken region of California that I'm visiting, and I want my lunch or my dinner to be a compatibly contemplative experience too. So I'm going to go to LACMA's in-house restaurant, Raisin Stark Bar, where there's a 45-page water menu, or at least there was prior to COVID. And I can invite the water sommelier over to the table to teach me about my options. So I don't see this opposition between the hamburger and the Botticelli that you described before. I see really interesting possibilities and examples of integration. I see museum restaurants as curating experiences for eaters who may or may not want to engage with the exhibits, but I think that's less important to me. Whether or not they are engaging with the exhibits directly, what happens in these restaurants is really symbolically important work. So I will stop now.
Thank you so very much. That's been very instructive and educational. You see, I'm the vox populi here, sitting amongst professionals. And what I get in my ear, what's being fed to my ear from surroundings, is this paradox of a story. I'm left with an impression that the main objective of a museum is to lure people in, to lure by, I don't know, steal, buy, I don't know, but get the visitor in. Maybe he didn't want to do that. Maybe he was just minding his own business, walking by, but due to a set of traps that the museum is placing, like have a cup of coffee with us and get a discount, or some minor things, steadily, slowly. He's like this fairy tale boy that was casting, I don't know, throwing those breadcrumbs on his way, gets into a house of a witch. Is that what the museum is doing? Aren't people go to museum conscientiously, specifically, to get familiar with art? Aren't we taking that into consideration? Do you think that, well, viewers need museums like that? Museums which lure people in, get them and force them buy the ticket, offer him an amazing service that he can get somewhere else, where you can also be treated with nice food, or where you can buy a book in a store or have a cinema, or does it have to be different? Can you please, once again, argue with me here? Anyone?
Happy to argue with you. I would be happy to. You say you speak as the vox populi, but you sound like a very crusty old timer in the perspective that you have, the perspective that you have of this kind of sacred temple that's very pure. And I think it's a very outdated notion, and the idea that you're that there's a trap.
Well, art has to be banal, you think? Art has to be commonplace. Well, that's something, that's quite an interesting viewpoint, yeah. I haven't heard that. Maybe once again I'm a crusty old yeah, I'm a crusty old guy here, but
No, please stay because this is the core audience of a museum. So please stay like this. The only thing is we want to attract the mass, and the mass of the people we need to serve with a different wrapping paper. They don't come to our temples, as you call it. We need Yeltsin centers, like in Yekaterinburg, which is fantastic combination between facilities and art. The way people want to be treated, they can dress up nicely. They can go to a museum. This also brings me to the fact that what I wanted to comment also on what Mitya said about the lines. Lines are very important. Lines attract people also, and lines can also be treated by people. You can, the Van Gogh Museum already put screens there to educate them before they enter the museum. They can also be already in the zoo in Moskovsky Zoopark. They also get screens how to behave in the zoo. So before the person enters, the education is already up to a level. So in all kind of ways, you can treat the people via your facilities. You also have combinations of experiences. If you look at the Chak Museum in Kazan, or if you look at the Columna Museum about Yablika, I sat there and I drank tea. So it's really possible, Mitya, without alcohol. But also museums do have alcohol. If you look at a corporate museum by the ICOM rules is also a museum. And it means that all the brands of vodka, but also in other countries, alcoholic brands, have their own museum, like a Coca-Cola museum, a Heineken museum. And also, they also, of course, want to, and not in every country, you can do it like you love to do it. But in the Ararat Museum in Armenia, they also serve you an experience of the product. So in many ways, there is a combination. And the last thing I wanted to mention is what also Anna has with her Moscow Museum near Park Kultura Metro Vokzal is that what is nice of a museum, restaurant, cafe, or hotel is that you can also have an entrance which is outside the museum. When the museum is closed, the business is still open. And that is an interesting thing because if it's closed, we need to go to Jean-Jacques to write on our tablecloths and to invent another museum, or to go to Dom Venatsit, sorry, and to sit there and to think about with colleagues how to do it in another way. But yeah, this is also for business very important to realize. Thank you.
Спасибо. Только вы сказали, действительно.
Well, what you said, I get it. I get it. Maybe we're not entirely properly defining a museum when we say a museum, because there are different things. You know, there's the State Hermitage or the Louvre, and then there's the Vodka Museum that you brought up. Different institutions, even though both are formally called a museum. So there are museums where the restaurants are evident, they're great, and they're thematic, you know, like there's a museum of bread or a museum of coffee. And sure, the restaurant just, you know, screams that it has to be open there because it's in, you know, inclusivity. You know, you're in the coffee museum and you're trying coffee, or same with bread. But there are museums where this is not entirely evident. So the question of the classical art or the questions of contemporary, even that, Vasily Tsereteli, the executive director of a Moscow Contemporary Art Museum, the Mart Cafe is a famous project that, apart from Mart Cafe, it, you know, a lot is integrated into it. There's a wine market and there's a dance club. There's a whole lot of entertainment. Mr. Tsereteli. This is one fabulous discussion. The museum's 20 years old. We opened cafe a few years ago with Mitya Borisov, and it became an extension of the museum. There's exhibitions there. There's a wine store that the sommelier, talks passionately about wine because the art, the wine is art. So you can't, like Bjorn said, about the 6 plates, but Bjorn also said the curatorial approach of chefs, that the participation of chefs in our life, recently for 20-year anniversary of the museum, where curators from different professions took part in the exhibition to the collection of Vladimir Mukhin, who is one of the top chefs. He has, one of the best restaurants in the world. He is number 9 on the list of the world's chefs. He was a curator of the exhibition, so visual art for him, contemporary art for him is an indispensable part of what he does. But apart from that, I remember 25 years ago, I remember in New York, you'd go to a restaurant at the Metropolitan Museum, and there's classical music playing, and you get this amazing experience. So when it comes to the, malls and museums, the Mori Museum is like in Asia, is in the mall. Bocamora Museum is in the mall. So that's, different places in the world have different experiences, but the restaurants is one of the traditional parts of any museum, like a store or all other additional sections. And I like what Kitty said. Memory matters. The image, the memory that sticks with you. So a lot of people that visit a museum, they remember the painting and they remember the taste. And then you could sit at the Yeltsin Center in Yekaterinburg. There's a restaurant that you can drink the alcoholic beverage that Yeltsin's wife used to love, and it extends your experience. In Tate Modern, you can try the dessert in this restaurant or a dish that's named after the artist, that or whatever the exhibited artist would like. So these are, it's like the sound and music, because you can read a paper book or you can listen as an audio book. And who says we interpret this experience differently? So I think a museum, it should have everything, like what Anna said. I recently was at the triennial at the garage, and the first thing I did, there were time slots, and I had 2 hours. And of course, first I had dinner at the restaurant, at the garage, and then I saw the exhibition. It's a great experience. The Museum of Moscow is now the biennial of young art that Anna hosted. We did it together. And as part of the biennial, there was a cafe, and indeed, people would go get tea, get coffee, and then they would walk around the exhibition. So all these things, they matter. But the legislature in our country is such that for whatever reason, theaters can have alcohol in the theaters, whereas museums, and all the difficulties with subsidized rent, so it's always difficult. So I think it matters to change this, to create more venues. So this experience, because food is part of your experience, is part of your important perception of yet another additional perception for the art. Let me ask again, if you mentioned that. How coherent, like in the Yeltsin Center, you said, how coherent should these experiences be? Like this alcohol that had to do with Nina Yeltsin. The menu of these restaurants does it need to match the museum, or how far, or or this, how it exists, and some operators just throw sandwiches around museums, and catering's done. I think every museum chooses what they like, and they choose what their audience is like, what the visitors. I don't like that there has to be a standard. I know this should be everywhere and this shouldn't be everywhere. The museum and we have Mart Cafe, we have versatile European cuisine. There's musical projects, we have exhibition projects. Recently on Yermolaevsky at the Education Center, we opened Momo Cafe. It's entirely different, a different menu. So, to each their own. Should we? This is why we need to invite the geniuses, because Mitya is my friend, but he's a genius of creating unique places. With the Jean-Jacques, Cafe 12, Cafe 16, they're unique. So, you need to look for artists or professionals. If the museum just gonna, do education and also gonna, cook and sell food, is gonna be complicated. Like the curator in the museum is a professional, it has to be one. So I vote that every industry has a professional in everything, and there's a professional synergy. All right, so everybody had a round. Now, summing up generalizing this topic, I heard a lot. I heard a lot as a someone who just discovers this topic as he goes, and I'm glad to hear unanimity here, that the professionals believe that the cafes and restaurants and the museums should be there, that there's never a question. I would like to clear things up a little bit, to imagine a situation: is there a museum in the world where a restaurant is out of place, where it shouldn't be? Just sort of to, mark the spectrum. There is a restaurant, there's a museum where that needs a restaurant, like in St. Petersburg. I don't know. The museum reserves. If a person goes to Pavlovsk or to Peterhof, and there are huge palaces on the city outskirts, it needs the more restaurants the better, because the people go there to spend the whole day, evidently. Is there opposite? There's a flip side to this coin. Can you imagine a museum as an exception? There shouldn't be a restaurant. No. No. Hang on. Imagine. Just an example. Just, the Museum of the Siege of Leningrad. A memorial museum dedicated to the tragic historical event. And like all of this in there is like, it's blasphemy. Well, hey, you come to a museum, you can sell the black bread in there, I have my doubts that, that this bread ratio here in St. Petersburg, it's a sacred topic. It's a dangerous topic. Well, hang on. The Patriot Park opened in Moscow. An enormous complex, and, all about memory, all about war. And you can go in there. I found my great-grandfather who were in the war. But there's a restaurant in there where you can, at any rate, you spread as a person. You can survive a tragedy. In the Jewish Museum in Moscow, there's, that's the Holocaust, tragedy. There's a cafe. Auschwitz, says the host. Petrovsky Kham across from our museum. You can try the traditional food. So if a museum in its physical capabilities, if it's a tiny house where there is no, you can place a cafe, then it's impossible. In all other cases, I think it's possible. Anybody else? I can say. A museum without a cafe as a stand, sure, it can appear. It will appear a few years later when the tendency that I support is going to be general practice everywhere. All museums in the world are going to have fantabulous restaurants. I'm going to pick a tiny conservative headed by you audience that doesn't like it, and we're going to open a museum that without additional experience. Well, I'm kidding, but it's going to happen. I'm sure that lots of people are intimidated, and I was actually going to speak at your side for a little bit. It's not my side. I am as the only participant, I have to present it here as well. What the museum community, the curatorial community reached, that through by using all means to attract the people, additional means, marketing. In Russia, everything is radical. Here in the museums, imagine in Moscow museums, it was prohibited to kiss. I was thrown out of the museum for kissing a girl, but on the subway, it was prohibited to kiss. I was detained on the subway once. So cafes. I have a feeling I'm the only restaurant professional here. I never lobbied here, but I found the most incredible restaurant lobby in my life. Because I've never sent this much support from such a high society. I've never seen that in my entire life. I never could imagine that. Awesome. So I'm so happy. I'm going to tell everyone, listen, see, I'm going to list everyone I spoke with today, and I said, maybe, we're trying to change the legislature finally, because making a decision about opening a cafe should be up to the museum curators. They are responsible for the content of the museum. Doesn't matter what it is. And, when what you're talking about, the Siege of Leningrad Museum, it's an extreme example. Should a museum of starvation, can a restaurant be a social place? I think it can be a museum of starvation. It can be a restaurant without food. Like there's a restaurant without light, where you're having an awful experience. I was never interested in the problems of the blind people until I tried a restaurant in the dark. We started charity projects. Museum of starvation, not just of the Siege of Leningrad, but of starvation. I would make a restaurant where I would lock you up and you can't eat for a week. The Moscow Museum of Gulag, where I was asked. We were talking about, we're building a concept. What's food in the Gulag Museum? Because it's a museum, but museum of horrors. Apart from a cafe, I think at the entrance, the guards with guard dogs should be meeting you at the entrance, and there you can try everything else. Try walking past barking German shepherds that are trying to attack you. Also, if you put your heads up behind your head and they bend you over, because otherwise you don't get the fullness of the experience. See, I agree with you, but these are inclusive theatrical practices, because the Siege of Leningrad Museum, you could give a person, try this slice of bread, but I agree with you. But prior to that, you need to force them to not eat anything for a week, and then they're going to feel the taste of that bread. Sure, but if it's full, or he or she is full, then, you know, as inclusive practice, but like when you, what I'm missing in St. Petersburg and in Moscow, unfortunately, when you, in Rome, at any Italian city, you walk into a temple without guards, opened all the way into the night. I know a few places in Italy sometimes open all night, and suddenly it's completely empty, and then suddenly you realize what's on the walls and how many generations have been praying here, and how many got married here, admired this, lived there, and that I can walk in and see in other museums. And here I'm in an everyday life situation, because the church is an everyday life thing. I see it in the life, in the context that it existed. You can also say that it's not a right thing. I agree with you. But I'm starting to my moderating function is slipping away from me, because we need to get a chance for everyone to speak. I remember that at the start of our conversation, Helena Kohlberg said that she has a presentation. Maybe we'll ask Helena to show us that presentation. Helena, would you like to do that?
Yes, of
You
course.
promised.
I mean, can you hear me? Yes, you've covered a lot of the topics that I was going to talk about, but I do have a case study, so I could maybe show you those images, because see if I can get this started here. Can you see the presentation now?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. I do see it.
So I wanted to introduce you to the National Museum in Stockholm and the new restaurant there, which opened in 2018. This restaurant was created in connection with the recent renovation of the museum, and it was created to reflect the mission of our museum, which is to be an art and design museum for all. And this restaurant was created in a collaboration between 30 designers and 20 producers. And this artistic effort resulted in a restaurant furnished with more than 90 bespoke products. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the National Museum in Stockholm, but in order to explain this very ambitious project we had to create this new restaurant, I just wanted to show you some images from the museum and explain how this all fits together. So National Museum is located in the center of Stockholm, overlooking the water, the old city, and the Royal Palace. And our collection consists of about 700,000 works of art and design, European art from 1500 to 1900, portraiture, decorative arts from 1500 to the present day. And this building, which is a really iconic building, opened in 1866 and closed for renovation in 2003. And then reopened in 2018 as a museum for all, a museum for everyone, and thus also a restaurant for everyone. And this renovation was really a unique opportunity for us to start afresh and renew the museum. And we set out to increase service and accessibility, to also take advantage of the 19th century architecture and create a unique modern museum experience. We wanted to show more art and integrate the collections of painting, sculpture, and applied arts, and also offer a wide variety of perspectives on art and art experiences, and thus not only in the galleries, but also in the restaurant, meeting rooms, etc. And what we have to offer today is, first of all, a comprehensive chronological collection presentation from the 16th century to present day. We have created a treasury with precious objects, what we call a design depot, where we focus on methods, material, process, and it's sort of an open storage concept. We have also created Villa Curiosa, which is a children's gallery designed to inspire exploration and discovery, a sculpture courtyard, and we also have temporary exhibitions, of course. And as part of this package, we also wanted the restaurant to be a sort of extension of the exhibitions, welcoming and relaxing sort of social space designed to stimulate interest in art, architecture, form, food, and drink. And in order to do this, we first picked a location within the restaurant. We picked a series of galleries that are overlooking the water and the city. These rooms originally housed the Museum of History and the collection of Stone Age tools. Then it became our paper conservation studio. And then now this particular room is the gallery's our main dining room. And to pull this off, we commissioned a group of designers led by Matti Klenell to develop a concept for the restaurant in connection, well, that reflected our needs and desires. So they divided the space into different areas to cater for different needs. They developed design guidelines and a color and material palette respectful of the original 19th century interiors. And then the National Museum asked this group to invite other designers to join them in this project and to give them specific tasks, because we really wanted as many as possible to be able to participate in this once-in-a-lifetime project. We specifically did not want a solo artist to put his or her brand on the restaurant. Instead, we wanted a restaurant to reflect our mission to be a museum for all and to be more like a contemporary design group show reflecting the current design scene. And following the National Museum brief, the project explored a number of specific themes, for example, teamwork. And the best example of that is, of course, the restaurant itself, but also the great chandelier that was created and now is in our glass bar with glass pieces by 10 different designers. Another challenge was, as we've been talking about a lot, who's the restaurant for? And for us, the restaurant was supposed to be for everyone, for young and old, for a quick or a long or very long stay, with food and drink for different size of pocketbooks and appetites. All of this resulting in a series of spaces with different but related characteristics. Here is illustrated by some of the chairs that were developed in the project. We developed a high chair for children, bar stools, armchairs, and sofas. The respect the museum building was important when, for example, picking colors and materials, but some of the architects used the museum as a very direct source of inspiration. For example, the ceiling in the grand staircase inspired the pattern of the table linen. The brief also encouraged designers to use the collection as a source of inspiration, literally or in a more abstract manner. And finally, the museum wanted the bespoke objects to be available for purchase. In part, this decision was made in line with our mission to be a museum for all. But it was also a financial model which allowed us to realize these ambitions project and work with producers willing to take on the development costs and in exchange for the rights to sell these products. Early on in the project, we also hired the chef Fredrik Eriksson and his team. About 50 restaurateurs applied for the opportunity to run the museum restaurant. However, Eriksson was the best fit for us, and his team were involved in developing the functions and the functional aspects of the restaurant furnishings, but they were not involved in the aesthetics. So now we have a restaurant that seats about 240 guests. We first welcome the guests into the kitchen, where we have bar seating overlooking the sculpture courtyard and the open kitchen. Then we have the dining room, the glass bar, a lounge, and also a chambre séparée called Herbert's Corner, which you can rent for special occasions or use as a community table. And again, also this educational aspect of the project. The National Museum Visitor Guide app. Here you can see and read about all the bespoke products. We also produced a book about the new collection, and on YouTube you can see how some of the objects were made. So I guess this is a very concrete example of what many things that we've talked about tonight.
Так, теперь надо бы как-то нам презентацию убрать.
Now you can stop sharing the screen. Will that be okay?
Yes, I'm
Ну что ж,
trying.
я думаю, что нам надо как-то Да, да, ну хорошо.
Okay, and while you're trying, you can do that, and I'll perform my own function. Unfortunately, not so much time remains until the end of the discussion, just 5 more minutes, so I think we need to wrap it all up somehow. And
У нас
what I can say, yeah, let me move it a little bit, my own screen over here.
этой дискуссии предшествовал небольшой у нас
This discussion was preempted by a little poll in the network. Do you have a favorite cafe? We're asking people in the museum. And more than a half people who we asked, they said that it's always nice to drink a cup of coffee after an exhibition. They never say where, and they never said which particular cafeteria they want to have their cup of coffee in, but it's hard to argue with that. Almost 40% of the people we asked and we polled, they say that in the museum, they either shouldn't be a restaurant or cafeteria, or they never themselves have ever visited a cafeteria or restaurant in a museum. Only a little percentage, 6% and something said that they come to a museum for a cafeteria specifically or a restaurant specifically, and we asked to give examples as well, and what I read from those examples is for example, the Hermitage staff headquarters, Mariinsky Theatre offers nice cakes, and Victoria and Albert Museum offers a nice experience. And I remember that back in 1988, when the cafeteria was opened there, Victoria and Albert Museum, there was a nice ad campaigning for a cool cafe with a nice museum attached. And that really created a buzz in the media, and it really appalled people. But since then, I think, well, a lot has changed, and professional opinion has also changed. Does anyone have any, like, final thoughts or final opinions to say something? We still have got 4 minutes. And I would be really happy if you could take, like, a brief moment to draw the conclusion to that discussion.
At least I would like.
Когда мы у Елена в ресторане живьем.
живьем, простите.
Когда мы
I suggest we should all meet in a restaurant, in this amazing cafe, because I watched the presentation from you, Helena. It's an amazing, amazing restaurant you have. Such a level, such a bar you raised there. That's definitely impressive. So this is something that I was talking about. So we definitely need to come to you. Will we be able, yeah, Helena, we need to come there personally, and that's going to be a nice chance to make physical everything we discussed today. Also, I wanted to... What I would like to add is Helena's presentation served as a nice wrapping up of our discussion today, because it's a true example of something that we need to strive to, that Scandinavian, super holistic approach to everything, a very good quality kind of project. But I think it's amazing that our organizers has raised an important topic today about restaurants inside museums. And me being a director of a museum who for a year and a half been transforming a museum, facing lots of challenges. So a restaurant is a great challenge, because creating a good quality restaurant is quite a task, I need to say. So this discussion for me is extremely important. That's my take on that.
And I think what Jelena did as a curator was actually the perfect combination. A curator presenting something commercial. For me, it is all about love. You have people who love objects / collection / the story. And you have people who love horeca, service, and giving people a great time and know how to make money. They love this. And if you lock these two people in one room, as a director, you could do this. And you say, you can only come out if you work together. Perfect museum.
Anyone else to add something to that? I think we've exhausted the topic, right? That was the end to it. Come on, guys, we still need 1 more minute. We need 1 more minute to go.
Okay.
Друзей,
Another
даже
thing what is interesting is
торговать
that
алкоголем,
because you have a restaurant or a cafe in your museum, you could also use this for branding. Because when people go, and maybe they don't visit the museum, they still go to something which is called a museum with the association of your museum. And many of these examples you already mentioned, Anna, with Tate. Everybody knows how to get over the Millennial Bridge to Tate just to drink a wine and know the view. Maybe half of the people have not been to the museum, but they know the place. And don't forget, in Russia, you have very, very good examples. So, and also learn a lot from other sectors, not only the cultural sector.
Ну что ж,
Well, that's an optimistic note that we can wrap everything up. This is, yeah, a good leeway towards completing our discussion today. Our next lecture will be held on the 26th of November, and we're going to talk about blockchain and art. And I'm so extremely thankful to all participants of this panel and discussion. It was really inspiring and interesting and engaging, and I wish you all a lot of success in this extremely important business. Bringing culture and restaurants together, because it's an opportunity for people to learn more about culture. Thanks a lot, and bye-bye for now.